Okay, everybody, let's get started. Welcome to the Cash Advances webinar. This is sort of an update to the current cash advance process that we've presented to you before. My name is Susan McDonough. I will be facilitating the webinar today. So we're scheduled for 60 minutes. I've got about 35 to 40 minutes of presentation, and then after that we will take questions. With me today I've got Nicole Shevick from Change Management. She's going to be monitoring the chat window. So as we go forward, if you have any questions as I'm speaking, please enter them into the chat window and we will answer them in the order that they were received. Here with us today to help answer questions, we've got a few people. Vanessa Peoples from OSR. We've got Emily Coble and Kathy James from Accounting Services. And all three, Vanessa, Emily, and Kathy, have been instrumental in developing this new process, so they'll be able to help answer our questions. So thank you guys for joining us today. This session is being recorded. We will post the recording on CC Info as well as this PowerPoint deck and also the reference documentation that has all the steps and screenshots for the different processes associated with cash advances will be up on CC Info. The documentation is already up on CC Info. The recording will be up as soon as we're able to process it. Okay, so the objectives of the webinar today is that we're going to go over the update to the process, and so you should be familiar with that by the time we're done. Specifically, we're going to cover the category and account codes that you'll use for cash advances, how to create a cash advance request, how to deposit funds for an unspent portion of a cash advance, and how to settle a cash advance. So the settlement part is the piece that's changed the most since we last presented the cash advance process. And also we'll finish up with how to monitor your cash advances. So the new cash advance process is effective as of today. So the procedure that we'll present to you today is effective as of today. But of course, if you've already entered in cash advances or submitted settlements, then those will be processed. There's no need to resubmit something that you've already submitted just because this new procedure is going into effect today. All right, so let's get started. I just want to sort of frame the cash advance settlement procedure around the different scenarios that you could have. So when you go to settle a cash advance, you're either going to have a scenario where your expenses are equal to your cash advance, greater than your cash advance, or less than your cash advance. So that is the settlement piece that comes at the end of the cash advance process. So the cash advance process, as we've seen before, you start by requesting your cash advance, which that you do through a campus voucher. So that's similar to what we have today. And then, of course, the cash is spent. And then to go and settle your cash advance, depending on the scenario, if applicable, you would enter an additional campus voucher if you needed to increase the amount of the cash advance. So if the expenses were greater than the initial advance, then you would enter an additional campus voucher for the additional funds. If it were a scenario where expenses were less than your cash advance, then you would enter a deposit to return the unspent funds. And always you would create a cash advance settlement journal to settle the cash advance. And I'm going to talk more about that in a few slides. But basically the settlement piece could include an additional voucher or deposit if you had more or less expenses than the original cash advance. And then you would always enter a cash advance settlement journal to settle the advance. So that's the key change here. Before today, to settle the cash advance, you were entering in another campus voucher. Now, instead of the campus voucher, you're going to be entering a campus journal under the GL navigation to settle the cash advance. Okay, so we're going to walk through those procedures today. And then, of course, you can monitor your cash advances, and we'll talk about how you can do that as well. All right. Just a note that if you have open cash advances from the legacy system, you do need to email this, send an email to this email provided here on the screen with all the documentation from the original advance so that accounting services can create an open item and settle the advance. And that would be for your non-OSR advances. All right, so I have some key points I need to cover sort of as background before I demonstrate how to create a campus voucher to create the initial request. So those key points are category codes and accounts that are associated with cash advances, allowable expense accounts that you can use cash advances for, some naming conventions that you need to use when you enter all the documentation around cash advances, the required documentation that you need to submit along with both your initial cash advance and your settlement journal, and also this concept of an open item, which is for non-OSR cash advances only. Okay, so let's go down this list, starting with categories and accounts. So basically you have things in two different categories. You have your OSR-related cash advances and your non-OSR-related cash advances. So for your OSR-related cash advances, you have two different category codes, and these category codes would be entered on the voucher. So this would be the initial cash advance request that you're making, or if you had to augment the amount of the cash advance and therefore create an additional voucher, the category code goes on the voucher. So for OSR, you have two possible category codes. If it's a cash advance, it would be UNC 00169. If it's OSR for travel, then the category code is UNC 00170. And also to the right out here, you can see I have the account codes. These default when you enter the category code. So when you enter UNC 00169, the account code defaults to 559510. When you enter UNC 00170, the account code defaults to 559510. Then for non-OSR cash advances, we have one category code, and that is UNC 00233. And when you enter that category code on the voucher screen, the account code defaults to 113920. So these are the category codes and account codes that are associated with cash advances that you must use on the campus voucher when you create a cash advance request. All right. Next, I have this list of allowable expense codes that you can, accounts that you can use when you go to settle your cash advance. These are the only expense accounts that are allowed. And you can see the descriptions to the right here. I won't list them all, but you can see there's, a finite list of things that we can use cash advances for. Also to the right, we have, identified whether they can be used for OSR or non-OSR or non-OSR only. All right, and again, not to memorize all this would be for your reference. All right, now let me talk about naming conventions. So the purpose of having naming conventions on your the voucher, the deposit, the settlement journal would be to be able to identify them and monitor them after you've already entered them. So the naming conventions for campus vouchers on the invoice line would be the recipient's last name plus the amount of the cash advance plus the first three letters of the month followed by the year. So for example, if it was Jane Doe, you would enter Doe 500. If it was March, you would put MAR and then 15. and that would go on the invoice line of the voucher. And on the line description, you'd have the exact same thing, okay? So turquoise blue here. All right, so that's the campus voucher. Then if you had to do an additional voucher to augment the amount of the advance, then on the invoice line, what you would do is kind of the same thing, except that instead of the initial amount of the cash advance for the amount, you would put the amount that you're augmenting that cash advance by. Okay, but then in the line description is essentially going to be exactly the same for all the transactions you enter for a single cash advance. So the line description on the additional voucher is going to be the exact same thing as the original voucher. So the last name plus the original amount plus the original month and year. Okay, so I'm trying to be consistent here with the colors to help you see it more clearly. All right, and then for the deposit, for the description on the deposit, you would put in the person's initials plus the word cash advance. And then on the line description, again, exact same thing as the original cash advance. So it would be the person's last name, the amount, and the month and the year. And I'm going to demonstrate all these in just a minute, but here you can have it all in one place. And then finally, to settle the advance, there's no equivalent of an invoice number, but on the line description of the settlement journal, it's the exact same thing. Person's last name, amount of the original advance, and followed by the month and year. All right. Required documentation, this has not changed. This is the same as we've been doing, but there are 3 forms that are required for the initial cash advance. The cash advance agreement, application for the advancement of institutional trust funds, and if applicable, request for advance of purchase of gift cards. So these first 2 would be always applicable, and the other one would be applicable if you were doing a cash advance for gift cards. And these forms you would complete and attach to the campus voucher. And then for the settlement, you have to use the cover sheet for the cash advance agreement, which has some other things that you have to attach to it, and that's included on the cover sheet. And then the reconciliation of cash advance for study subjects. And I do have the link out to these documents available for you. Also, just a note, for non-OSR advances, when you go to settle, you can attach those documents to the cash advance settlement journal and submit those electronically. For OSR advances, you need to attach the documents as well as send hard copies of the original receipts to OSR. It's really important that you send the original receipts. They cannot take duplicate of the original receipts. They have to have the original. Okay, it's just so that they can comply with requirements on their end. All right, so the last concept I want to cover before I get into how we enter these transactions is this idea of open item, which is only used for non-OSR cash advances. But there is this open item field on the distribution line when you go to enter your campus voucher that you need to enter if it's a non-OSR cash advance. And basically it's equivalent to the vendor ID. And the vendor ID is always the person's that's receiving the advance. It's their ID, which will default when you enter that person's ID or name. But that's the number that goes in the open item field. All right, and the open item number is how you will be able to track the non-OSR cash advance transactions, which I will get to at the end of the presentation. All right, so that's open item. All right, so let's just review a second. Category codes entered on the voucher when doing a cash advance, we have 3. UNC 00233 for non-OSR, UNC 00169, and UNC 00170 when it's OSR cash advances. The account codes default based on the category code. They are 113920, 559510, and 559511. And again, those default based on the category code that you enter. There are specific expense account codes that can be used for cash advances that I showed in my previous slide. The open item field is entered for non-OSR cash advances, and that is the vendor ID. And then finally, we have naming conventions that you need to follow in the invoice number field when doing the voucher, and then on the line description field on the voucher, the deposit, as well as the settlement journal. All right. So let's move on now and take a look at how you would enter a campus voucher when doing a cash advance request. So basically here, you would navigate to the campus voucher entry page, and here I've done that. And the key fields you would enter are the vendor, so that's the person receiving the cash advance, the invoice number. So here's an example of what I was talking about with the naming convention for the invoice number. It's the person's last name, the amount of the advance, and then the 3-letter abbreviation for the month and the 2 digits for the year. Then you put in today's date, and then the gross amount would be the amount of the advance. You click Add, and then this brings you to the invoice information page of the campus voucher, and you can see that those fields have defaulted. And then here's where you want to use the Image Now Attachments link to attach your documents and add comments if applicable. Then scrolling down that page is where you want to enter your description for that campus voucher. So that's where this comes into play, where this would be, consistent with all the transactions you enter for that single cash advance ultimately would have this exact same description on it. The person's last name, the amount of the advance, and then the month and the year. And then in the category code field, that's where you would put in the applicable category code. So remember, we have 3 different category codes, 2 for OSR, 1 for non-OSR, and that's where that would go. Then down below in the distribution lines, you want to put a quantity of 1, fill in your applicable chart fields, fund source, and then here's where the account defaults based on the category code that you enter, and department, and then of course if it's OSR related, you need to enter your project ID, the business unit for OSR, and the activity field as well. And then if applicable, since this is a non-OSR cash advance, you also need to scroll to the right and enter the open item number, which again is the vendor ID number. Then you click Save, and then the rest of this is processing a voucher just as you would process any other voucher. You need to run budget checking, submit for approval, enter a comment, and then of course you're going to see the approval flow for that voucher. Okay, so the key change there is just the naming convention for the cash advance. All right, so that's entering the cash advance request. So now let's take a look at how you would settle the cash advance. So to settle the cash advance, it's just, let's just take a look at, depending on the scenario, what you would actually be doing. So remember, there's 3 different scenarios, and all driven by whether your expenses are equal, greater, or less than your original advance. So if you have a situation where your expenses are equal to your cash advance, then you would do step 1 of entering the campus voucher like we just did, with the applicable category code, which defaults the account code and the amount. And then when you go to settle, you're entering a campus journal to settle the cash advance, And on the first line, you're entering the specific expense account that applies to how those funds were used, and that's where that list of allowable expense codes come in. And then the debit line has the positive amounts of the cash advance, and then the credit line relieves that cash advance. And so this is where in the account code you would put 113920 or whatever the account code was for that cash advance, and then the negative credit amount would be on line 2. So on your journal, it's the line, your debit line is booking the expense, and your credit line is relieving the cash advance. All right, so that's scenario number 1. And then scenario number 2, first step, you have the same thing. You're creating the cash advance and booking the open item, or booking the cash advance rather. And then if you have if your expenses are greater than your cash advance, then what you would have to do as an additional step from the first scenario is you would enter a campus voucher for the additional amount, and you would put in that same account code, the amount that you're augmenting the advance for. And then when you go to settle the journal, similar to the previous scenario, the first line is booking the expense, so you would enter the applicable expense code, and then the amount is basically the total amount of the advance. So it would be the total amount of your original voucher plus the additional voucher that you entered to augment that advance. So in my example here, you can see that that's $250. And then on line 2, again, would be to relieve the cash advance, so you would have a credit line of negative $250. So that's the second scenario. And then the third scenario, if your expenses are less than your cash advance, again, your first step is going to be the same. You book the cash advance through a voucher, and then to return the unspent or unused funds, you enter a deposit, and you would make the line of that deposit of a negative amount. And then when you go to settle the journal, again, the first line is booking the expense, and the amount is basically the amount on your settlement journal is always the amount of the funds that were actually used for the cash advance purpose. That's how helps me to think about it. So in this case, we actually used $150 for that cash advance because we requested $200. We gave back $50, and so my settlement journal is for $150, and that's the debit line. And then the credit line relieves the cash advance, again, for $150. Okay? So that's kind of what we're doing. So let's take a look. I've got one screenshot here only of just imagine that we're doing an additional voucher to augment the amount of the cash advance. You would enter your voucher, campus voucher front page just as we did before. Your invoice number is going to reflect the amount that you're augmenting that advance by. So in this case, let's say we're augmenting it by $100, then we put last name $100, and then the month, and then the year, and then the gross invoice amount is $100. On the line, though, remember we always want the description to be exactly the same throughout all the transactions related to a single cash advance. So on the description line, instead of putting last name and the amount of this particular voucher, we're putting the amount of the original cash advance voucher, so that would be $350. And then the category code, everything else would be exactly the same. You put in the category code, your chart field string, and then process it just like we processed it before. Okay, so the key difference there is the naming convention and the gross invoice amount for the second voucher. If your cash advance is greater, the expenses are greater than what your original cash advance was for. All right, let's suppose, though, that your expenses were less than your original advance and you need to enter a deposit. This is not changed, again, except for the naming convention. So you enter a deposit, navigate to the deposit page, just like you see I've done here, and enter in the deposit unit, business unit, which is always CHSTR, or I heard somebody say Chester for short. If that helps you, then click Add after you enter Chester. All right, then come to this page, and on this page we're going to enter the department and the phone number and the campus box, and we're going to enter the total amount that we're returning, which would be a positive number. So there's a little bit of thing to remember here about what you're entering as positive or negative. But here, you know, the amount you're depositing is a positive, so you put that, you know, $50. The two lines here are to distinguish between cash and check. So let's say we were returning cash, that's $50. Click the Calculate Totals button. Here you always want this count number to be 1. It defaults to 1. Leave it as 1. It needs to be 1. If you make it something other than 1, it causes problems in managing this process. So leave that to 1. Leave the dates as is, and then click Payments. And then in the amount here again, you put $50. Here's where that naming convention comes in for the deposit. Put BP Cash Advance. Click this Journal Directly checkbox. Click Refresh. Click Save. This all here, I'm going to go a little bit quickly because this is just now standard processing for deposits. There's nothing different here about processing your deposit. You click Accounting Entries, enter your chart field string, which would be the same chart field string that you entered for your cash advance. Click the journal line reference number. Here is where under the Journal Reference Information tab is where the Open Item Key field is. So if this is a non-OSR cash advance, you would enter the Open Item Key, which is the vendor ID. Then click the Currency Details tab. Under the Currency Details tab is on the deposit is where the line description is. So you would enter the same description that you entered on the voucher to request the initial advance. So that's the person's last name, the amount, the month, abbreviation, and the year. And then way over here to the right that's not captured on my screen, there's a refresh button that you want to click. Just one note that if you have personalized, there's this personalized link. If you have personalized your page so that the line description is right next to your department chart field, then essentially that makes this currency details button disappear. And so, but you'll see that and you'll know that. I know that in the deposits class that was offered as a tip. So some of you might have already personalized your deposits screen. So just be aware that what I captured here is the delivered design of the page, so I didn't confuse anybody. But if you've personalized your screen, then your description field will be right next to your department chart field. All right, let's get this up. Okay, and then you click the lightning bolt. That makes the offsetting lines appear. Click the chart field. Click Complete. Click Apply. Click OK. This is just standard processing of deposits. And then you submit, and then you can print that daily cash transmittal form. Okay? So that's how to enter a deposit. Again, the key fields are the line description, the amount. Oh, let me go back one minute here. I don't think I mentioned, yes, I'm sorry. I mentioned when you're entering in the amount of the deposit is entered as a negative. Okay? So prior to that, when you were on the front page talking, entering in the amount, it was a positive. When you get to the distribution line, it's a negative amount. Sorry, I didn't mention that. All right, so we have seen how we're in the settlement phase, and we have looked at how to enter a voucher and a deposit should you need to either augment your cash advance or give money back. And now let's take a look at how to enter the settlement journal. So this is the part that's brand new with the new procedure. So there has been a new transaction type added to the list of journals. It's called Cash Advance Settlement, just for this purpose, and it is available today. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you want to start using this process as of today. All right, so to create that settlement journal, you navigate to the Campus Journal page like I've done here, so you can see the navigation on the top, and then you will select the Cash Advance Settlement from the transaction group, click your Search Transaction Type button, and then select your Cash Advance Settlement link to get to your journal page, okay? So then you want to enter the amount. So I've entered in $300. Let's assume that my expenses were less than my original amount. And so I enter in $300 for this settlement. And I enter in the chart field string. On the debit line is the debit line is books the expense. Okay, so I've entered in the amount. My chart field string, so my fund and source is the same as I previously entered. The account is the expense for which I actually use those funds. So travel, miscellaneous, whatever the case might be. That's where that list of allowable expense codes comes in, and the department. And then my journal line description, again, is consistent throughout all the transactions for the cash advance. I click Auto Balance. Remember to click Auto Balance. And guys, just a plug for Campus Journals. Remember, when you're working with Campus Journals, always work left to right. Okay, the page just really likes to work, enter your fields from left to right. Don't, enter box 3 and then box 1. It kind of doesn't like that. So remember to enter your fields from left to right. All right. So I clicked Auto Balance, and now you're entering in your credit line essentially to relieve that initial cash advance. And so, as you know, when you click Auto Balance, it brings down the chart fields from row 1. So put in your chart fields or edit the chart field string as you need to. One chart field string you'll need to enter on the account needs to be the cash advance account that you entered on the original cash advance, because it's the credit line that relieves the cash advance. So we entered 113920, or that's what defaulted from the category code. So that's what you enter on the credit line. Okay. If it's an non-OSR cash advance, then on the settlement journal you also enter the open item key. Click Save, and then it's like typical processing of a journal. You send it through the edit process. It needs to pass the edit process and the budget checking process. Once it's done that, then you click Submit, and then once you've successfully submitted it for approval, you will see the approvers for that particular journal. All right? So that's how you would enter in the Campus Journal. So just to review, again, what we've done, scenarios, again, when you're entering, if it's expenses are equal to your cash advance for the settlement journal, you're entering in your amounts are the same. Line 1 is always booking the expense. Line 2 is always relieving the cash advance. When expenses are greater than the cash advance, your settlement journal, again, is line 1 is the expense, line 2 is relieving the cash advance. Your amount is always going to be the total amount of your advance. Okay, so in this case, if you have to augment the amount of the advance, it would be greater than your initial advance. Also, if the expenses are greater than the cash advance, you're entering an additional voucher. And then if your expenses are less than your cash advance, you have to do the deposit to give back the funds, but then your settlement journal is going to be on a debit line, the booking the expense, and it would be less than your original advance, basically ultimately what you used your cash advance for, and then line 2 would be to relieve the cash advance. All right. Just one point about the journals is that if you need to do a correction on a posted cash advance voucher, you can do that. We've set it up so the system will allow you to correct those. So you can correct the posted cash advance voucher through the correcting voucher JE type. But just keep in mind that on the correcting voucher JE type, you cannot edit the account field. That is a field that is not enabled. If you feel like you really need to do that, then you need to email disbursement services with a justification of why you would need to do that. But it's only disbursement services that could change the account code. If you need to correct posted deposits or journals, then you use the correcting JE campus journal type. And on those, all the fields are available to edit. Okay, so just a point, if you find that you do need to correct a posted transaction in any of this process, you can do that through either of the correcting JE types. All right. A couple more points. We've got a concept to cover step 3, how you can monitor your cash advances. Let's say you've entered in all these transactions and you want to stay apprised of them. So there's 2 different ways to do this, and it's dependent on whether it's a non-OSR cash advance or an OSR cash advance. So for the non-OSR cash advance, because they're using the open item functionality, you can still go to this review status online page. So you see the navigation here is through the general ledger, open item, review status online. And because you entered that open item key into those cash advances, you'll be able to search by open item key, and essentially what it does is it'll bring back all the transactions with that open item key on it. So I enter in my example here. Let's say the vendor ID, the person's ID was 0s and 1047. I enter that in here, and then I click search. And then what happens when I click search is this other field pops up with this link. I click it, and what displays is all the transactions, as I mentioned, that have that open item key on it. And here you'll be able to see the journals related to that open item. And so here, the journal related to vouchers start with ACC. The journal, this is the campus journal. It doesn't have like an alpha prefix, and the deposit would have ARD in front of it. And so here's where that journal line description comes in handy. So you can see all the transactions related to that advance have the same line description on it. So one way to do a check. And then the amount here you can see sort of zeroes out. So in this particular case, you know that a request was made, a deposit was given back, and then a settlement was made. So this one is all square. In the case of OSR journals, they're not OSR cash advances are not using the open item functionality. So that review status online page would not have your OSR cash advances because there's no open item to search by, but you can find them on the InfoPort Transactions tab rather easily. If you search by your department and one of the two account codes related to OSR cash advances, remember we had two, 559510 or 559511, then that will bring up all your cash advances, that you've entered for that department. Now, because this is going into effect today, I've sort of created these screens to show you what it will look like. So you see that if you enter in a voucher, the description field is going to have the vendor ID and the vendor name. And then the second part of this trans ID, this is going to be the voucher ID, and this is going to be, that invoice number that you entered on your voucher. So that's one way to track the vouchers that you entered for the initial cash advance request. And then the journal will come in. You'll be able to tell that it's a journal because the trans type field will say journal, and then the description field is going to have the journal line description that you entered. So, and then you'll see the amounts out to the right. So, but basically by searching for that account in your department, you'll be able to, really narrow down the cash advances that you've entered. All right. So that concludes my content. Let's just review here a second what we've talked about. Basically, we saw how the process for entering in cash advances. We created a campus voucher for a cash advance. If it's applicable, you would either enter a university deposit for the unspent portion or a second voucher if your expenses were greater than your initial advance. And then always, and this is the new thing with the new procedure, is that rather than entering a campus voucher to settle your advance, you're entering a campus journal. Okay, so we're going from AP to GL to settle the advance. For non-OSR cash advances, you can monitor those advances through the open item page. For OSR cash advances, you can use the InfoPort Transactions tab. Just a side note, you cannot use the InfoPort Transactions tab to monitor your non-OSR advances because those use a one account, and one accounts don't show up on the Transactions tab. So don't think that something's missing. They're just not there. So use that review open item page to monitor your non-OSR cash advances. All right. And then we also covered the category codes. Keep those in mind. The accounts, open item keys, and naming conventions, super important. And then, of course, remember the supporting documentation. When you go to settle, OSR needs hard copies as well as the soft copies, and they need the original receipts. If it's not OSR, you can submit everything electronically. All right, and one more thing just before I turn it over to Q&A. Just a reminder, we have put the documentation is already up on CC Info, and we'll get this recording of the webinar there just as soon as we can get the recording processed. And also, I promised you the link to the cash advance forms. If you don't have it already, it's also here right on the slide. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who's been monitoring the chat window, for questions.
So I've had a very easy job because we haven't had any questions yet. And I have a hard time imagining that all of you out there in the university sphere don't have a single question. So just to remind you, we have Kathy James and Emily Coble with us from Accounting Services and Vanessa Peoples from OSR. So now is your chance. You're going to have questions. You're going to wish you'd ask them. Bring it on. Bueller? Bueller? Yeah, they can hear us. Yeah, we're mic'd. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take about 1 minute and give you guys a chance to talk amongst yourselves and ask any questions that you have. And type those in, and we'll be happy to take those and get you some answers. So you guys have about 30 seconds left, and we'll wait for any questions you might have. I recognize some names and locations of people who logged in. I'll have to call y'all out and tell you to submit a question. I won't do that to you. I saw you on there, Family Medicine. Just saying. Oh, wait a minute. I just heard the chat is disabled in our webinar. Well, my goodness. It's enabled now. Sorry about that. Okay. What documentation is required for the second voucher for increasing the cash advance for disbursement?
It would be the same documentation as if you were requesting an initial cash advance. You would want another form filled out requesting the increase, a signed cash advance form saying I'm requesting it and I'm going to reconcile in a certain amount of time, and just the same forms as if you were requesting an initial amount.
Okay, I have someone who said, do you have more to add?
No.
I have someone who said, sorry, I missed the first part. Is the campus voucher done the same?
Same as what?
So the campus voucher process is essentially the same. The difference would be the naming conventions, and the PowerPoint is going to be posted, so that's the best way to get it so you can read that. But it's essentially the invoice field would have the person's last name who's receiving the advance, the amount in dollars and cents, the 3 alpha abbreviation for the month, and the 2-digit for the year goes in the invoice field, and that exact same thing goes in the description field on the line. The other thing, if you have to do a voucher to augment, then the description field is always the same in all the documentations, including the second voucher.
Okay. The student guide is quite long. Is there a cheat sheet available?
We'll have to update it. There is one now, but it's not up to date.
There is a quick reference card available. We're in the process of updating that, and we will repost that on CC Info.
Who will do the deposit in OSR cash advance reconciliation?
The deposit will need to be sent to OSR so that OSR can do the deposit.
If the process has already been started for a cash advance, do we settle it using the process now, this process now?
If the settlement has not been started, you will change to this new process.
If doing a gift card advance, does an additional campus voucher need to be done for activation fees? They're contemplating.
If the activation fees were not included in the initial advance, then yes, you would need a new advance to pick up those fees.
What would be the naming convention for an additional voucher, same amount, same month? Oh, so like if somebody has already got one voucher for $350 in March of 2015, what if they get a second for $350 in March of 2015?
So
I think that's what you mean, Jared. So if it's not, let us know.
It's a unique cash advance, in other words, but it's just a new cash advance that looks exactly the same. Well,
take an additional letter, put an A or something in to identify it.
Okay. So did you hear that? They said put an additional letter or a letter.
A letter or a number, something to identify that
it's slightly different. Okay. What is the process, has it changed, for settling a cash advance that was open prior to the transition to ConnectCarolina?
So if you had entered a cash advance prior to go live, you need to first send an email. I have the email. Let me go to that slide in my presentation. You need to send an email to accounting services, basically with all the documentation from the original advance. Yeah, and this is my answer applies to that's not the right slide. Slide 5, thank you. My answer here applies to non-OSR. You would need to submit all the documentation for the original advance to this email here on the screen, mchris@email.unc.edu. If it's OSR, then you would follow the process I outlined today, even if it's from legacy. Yeah.
What documentation is required to be submitted to OSR for a deposit?
So we would need the fund plus the chart field string that it applies to and the cash advance that it's related to.
How should we settle OSR subcontract cash advances? There is no allowable account code for subcontract expenses, 569461 or 569486. And if you use 537210 or 558914, there would not be a budget line in an OSR subcontract project ID for those account codes.
So after this webinar, we'll be revisiting the allowable accounts for the OSR cash advances with accounting services. And I think once we review that again, we'll send out some additional information about the allowable code. We'll have to look into the issue with the budget for the subcontract, so I can follow up this webinar with the answer to that at a later time.
Some of the answers we are not able to hear. Can you please speak up? Yes, we can, and we will. Good, Garrett. I'm glad you got your answer. That's great. And Kevin, we're going to speak louder. Okay. Kat said, I wasn't able to hear the answer to gift card activation fees. Emily, can you come over and get up close and personal with the mic?
The activation fees, you will need to create a new cash advance to pick up the fees if they were not included on the original cash advance.
All right. Policy question. When would you process a travel advance for a non-UNC employee on sponsored research funds?
I think that's a really good question. I wish I had a really good answer. It's rare that we see these now. So I will have to get back to the group on that one.
The library has specific account codes we must use for library materials. I do not see them in the list. Can they be added?
We are currently evaluating a number of different accounts. If you can send the ones that you possibly need to accounting services, you can send them to me in particular. This is Emily. We can evaluate them and we can get back to which ones may need to be added.
And so it's Emily Coble, C-O-B-L-E, and look her up in the directory. What documentation is required for settling a cash advance for a gift card purchase, non-OSR related? Do we need a receipt from the recipient of the gift card?
It depends on if we're talking about an employee or are we talking about study subjects.
So Lexi, can you tell us if we're talking about an employee or study subject? She said non-OSR, so you can do non-OSR.
You can do still study subjects.
Okay, we'll wait for clarification on that. So, are receipts scanned and attached to the settlement, or do we send the receipts to accounting services?
you can scan the receipts and attach them to the settlement for accounting services.
What information should be entered on the back of Form 307.1.4F? Can you tell us, maybe remind us which form that is?
That's the reconciliation of cash advance for study subjects that would go with the settlement.
So what information should be entered on the back of that form?
I didn't know that anything needed to be on the back of the form. If you could clarify that a little more, we would appreciate it.
Okay. And so this goes back to the question about, hang on just a second. Where's Lexi's question? What documentation is required for settling a cash advance for a gift card, non-OSR related? Do we need a receipt from the recipients of the gift card? She clarified, the gift cards will go to the students that will be the finalists of the science art competition, sponsored by the science art competition organized by APSC.
I would get the students to sign a receipt, yes. Most likely you don't need to send those to accounting services, but you would still need to have the students sign those. Since this is not a study, but this is a student award, I would have them sign something saying they've received those gift cards.
Right. So that is our, has anything changed to the petty cash / Impress checking reimbursement voucher process? 304.1.1F. So that's a completely different process outside of what we're discussing today, I believe. And do we know who maybe this person could contact for more information? So if you have questions about Steady Cash and Impress checking, you can contact disbursement services for the reimbursement process. Okay. Is a signature also required for gift card advances for departing employees?
It can never hurt to get a signature from someone when they receive a gift card. It doesn't always mean you have to submit it to accounting services, but at least you have it on hand if it's required later to be viewed by anyone. So it's always good to get the signature and hold in the department, and if it's required to be submitted later, at least you have the documentation.
The college says, thank you for this webinar. It was very helpful. And there's some exclamation points on the end. And you're welcome. We bring it to the people weekly. Happy to do it for you. I'm here for comic relief, sorry. Any other questions? We have 3 minutes left. Any other questions? The chat window is on and is accepting your comments and questions. We'll hear more about how great things are. Always good. Anything else? Oh, when I sell gift cards for, let's say, $1,000 from various vendors, how many lines do I need to complete on Form 307.1.4F? That's, again, the reconciliation form.
If you have more gift cards than what lines are available, you can always say, please see attached, and attach an Excel worksheet.
Right. Good. Please include these questions and answers in the recorded version of this webinar that you post. That's an excellent suggestion, Pam.
Yes, and I'll also actually write them up and put them in the PowerPoint or somewhere so you can see them.
All right, so I don't know if they'll be in the webinar, but certainly in the PowerPoint and posted on CC Info. Back to the question about settling gift cards, like for $1,000. They are in increments of $10 and $5. So will it be extreme? So it will be extreme is there a shortcut available? And I think that gets back to the Excel spreadsheet. It still has to be documented.
Correct. It still needs to be documented.
Yes. So Tanya 3, you will need to put that in an Excel spreadsheet and attach that. Okay. Do I initiate a deposit if OSR funds are not fully expended? In the past, we send the check to OSR and they initiate the deposit.
You will need to continue to send the check to OSR for OSR to process the deposit.
We have about 1 minute left, and we're happy to take any additional questions or comments. I have the Excel. Do I also need to type in the form? This is my very first time. And Tanya, if you have the question, somebody else has it too. So don't ever feel bad about asking questions.
In the form, just type in, please see attached. You can put the total on the form, and that should cover it.
Right. So for OSR items, does that mean that they will be used for OSR items, i.e. study subject payments, or that it will be coming out of an OSR account? I think it's that OSR. She's saying like something to support OSR work versus OSR, like a project actually paying for it, is how I'm interpreting this question. Right. So it has to do with whether or not you're using a project ID, funds associated with a project ID. Is that right? Yeah. Megan, I'm interpreting your question, but I may not be interpreting it correctly, so maybe if you could just rephrase for us. Where will the PowerPoint slides be posted? And those will be posted on CC Info. So you can go to Training, and under Training, you go to the Resource Documents, and there is a link on Resource Documents to Webinars. And so you'll be able to find the webinar there and any documentation. And Susan is advancing now to that slide so you can see.
So Megan, I'm going back to your question. This is Vanessa. So when we were, I'm not sure if this is the answer to what you were asking, but when we're talking about OSR, that means that you have received a cash advance on a project ID and are settling that cash advance on a project ID. Does that answer your question?
When I am giving the cash advance originally, it's coming out of my residuals and then reconciled to the actual trials. Which code do I use originally? OSR or non-OSR? Which code does she use originally?
Yes. So then it would be 113.
So it's my understanding that if you do your original cash advance, if you do the original cash advance off of your residuals, then you need to settle back to that residual. Chart goes straight. And then subsequently, if those expenses belong on a trial, then you can do the transfer of the expense to the trial.
To the correcting JE?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. So it's 12:02. You guys have had some really good questions. Thank you so much for your participation. We're glad we turned the chat feature on. That always makes it easier. So we will get this information posted to CC Info. We hope you guys have a good day and that you advance until your hearts are content. So cash on. Thank you.
Thank you.